Hey folks, thank you for joining us for this week's Texas Counts weekly update. We just went live on Facebook and just opened up the Zoom webinar, so we're going to give it a minute or so to allow folks to tune in. But thanks again for joining us. We'll get started soon. All right, we are going to go ahead and get started. Again, welcome everyone to this week's Texas Counts weekly update. Today is Monday, July 20th, if you can believe it. Today I am joined by two fabulous women, one being, of course, Dr. Lila Valencia from the Texas Demographic Center, and then Ms. Genesis Sanchez from the NALEO Educational Fund, and I am Katie Martin Lightfoot from Every Texan. If you have joined us for a weekly update in the past, we are still doing the exact same agenda that we will always share out with, of course, starting things off with a welcome to everyone joining us. Again, thanks for joining us today. We know that with our new schedule of every other Monday, it can be kind of confusing to figure out when to tune in, but glad you were able to join us today. After our welcome, I will pass it over to Genesis, and she will be sharing out the latest in terms of the 2020 census updates. Then we'll pass it over to Dr. Lila Valencia, who's going to walk us through that self-response data here in Texas. And then we'll wrap things up with some get out the count efforts that we can be doing this week. As always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to use that chat box as well as the Q&A box if you're tuning in on Zoom. And if you are joining us via Facebook Live, again, welcome. And if you have any questions, comments, concerns, go ahead and use the comment box there as well. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Genesis to give us some updates.
Thank you, Katie, and thanks everybody for joining us. I hope everybody is doing well and staying safe, especially during these times. Next slide, please. I shared this in the last report that we had back, and again, it's just I just combined some of the more pertinent current operations that are based in Texas, and so people can have these handy, and you can, if your particular area is impacted by one of these operations, you'll have this ready for yourself. Next slide. This is the week, so between July 22nd to the 28th, a 6 reminder postcard is set to arrive to homes that haven't yet responded. So along with the Census Bureau Search Week, which Katie's going to talk a little bit more about later, this is a good opportunity to send out another reminder to your community members that, hey, you may be receiving more mail. Please don't ignore it, don't throw it away. The Bureau is asking you to respond. So just keep that in your back pocket as well. Next slide. So the Bureau, given our last report, so on July 8th, the Bureau had a kind of like a public call with a number of folks. And so they gave us some updates on some of the adjustments that they're making. One of them is that the group quarter enumeration, folks who live in, like nursing homes and places like that, should have already been in communication with the Bureau starting in early July. And so they have a set number of enumerators who are hoping to complete this operation by September. They're asking them to provide this response via e-response or using the Dropbox pickup questionnaire response to minimize any kind of prolonged contact with folks, especially those who may be vulnerable. The MQA is also back. So I know folks have had some questions about this. Just so everybody knows, the Bureau doesn't anticipate any large gatherings included in the program, again, to minimize harm or risk. They're going to be launching this program in essential services sites, so places where places where everybody's going, places like grocery stores, libraries, etc. It should be ready to launch in early August with assistance and partnership staff, and it's going to be happening nationwide in areas that are considered safe. So and they may not be physically everywhere, but in select areas, and they are designed to be in places where current responses are very low, so they won't be everywhere. And they anticipate about 20 to 30 workers in cities with about, a 250,000 people. So again, they're not going to be everywhere, but they are going to try to place themselves in areas and tracks where response rates are really low. So keep an eye on this. If you work closely with your partnership staff, please reach out to them, stay in touch with them, and plan around them so you can have a better sense of, if you need their support, let them know with time and start planning now for any of these events. Next slide. I also wanted to take a moment to talk about non-response follow-up since we're kind of heading into August pretty soon here. So the Bureau has kind of accelerated some of their timelines, and they're doing their soft launches of NERFU in more places than we originally anticipated, and you can see the entire list here. Unfortunately, there's no place in Texas that currently has NERFU. So for Texas, we still anticipate August 11th to be the date when it starts here. The Bureau anticipates that they'll have about 500,000 census enumerators in the field. They have shared with us that, and they've shared with this with us consistently, is that they don't want journalists or community members to follow enumerators. So if that was something you had in the back of your mind, again, remember that the Bureau obviously really is mindful of confidentiality, so they really can't have community members with them. And so just putting that out there in case that was an idea folks had. If a censor, when in thinking about NERFU, we want to make sure to prepare our community members in case they decide that they do want someone at the door, or in case, they do see someone at the door and they're confused about why they're there. If a census taker does visit a home or the home of your neighborhood landlord or your other proxy, they're never going to ask to enter the home. They're going to identify themselves and wear a U.S. Census Bureau badge. They're only going to ask questions that are on the questionnaire, and they cannot ask for any additional documentation or point out anything about, if they see, something discarded or something on your lawn, they can't point it out, can't mention anything about it. More recently, the Bureau also changed their mind about PPE. Originally, they had not confirmed that all census enumerators and staff would be wearing masks. They were going to leave it up to local ordinances, but now they've required a universal mask wearing. And so they are going to be receiving reusable masks, individual gloves, and hand sanitizer bottles, enough for the duration of their employment. And so that's another added, along with their bag, their badge, they'll also have PPE. Next slide. And just so you have a sense, and for folks who prefer to see this kind of visually, these are the area census offices that do have some sort of non-response follow-up prior to the August 11th date. As you can see, the majority of the nation will start NERFU on August 11th, so we'll continue to keep an eye and hopefully hear back from other parts of the country to see how it's going in other areas. And fingers crossed that August 11th is still a good date for Texas. Next slide, please. And then finally, as I mentioned in our last session, NERFU starts, so the Bureau has asked us that, with the last mailed reminder, this is a good opportunity to, it's to share a message of where we're saying it's not too late to respond. NERFU, we'll have a NERFU Day of Action on July 28th across the country. And so if you're planning an event, this is a good day to do so. There is a webinar on census and redistricting on Thursday, July 30th that's being hosted by Census Count. The emphasis is a little bit on AAPI communities, but I think it's still a really valuable resource in case this is of concern to you. And then I also wanted to share that we have a small number of printed materials to give to our partners. So in particular, we have a lot of kids' shirts, we have posters and pins and pens. And so if anybody wants to request these materials, please send me a message directly. My email is listed here. Actually, my email is wrong here. I'm going to retype it in the chat. But if you want any of these materials, let me know. I'll start sending them out probably sometime next week. And it's not a ton, but I do want to make sure that these get to places where response rates are really low and where folks are, having some sort of, socially distantly safe event. And with that, I think I'm done. I'm going to answer a few questions that are popping up here. So yeah, Sophia shares MQAs have started July 13th, but we will not be able to set up MQAs in certain counties with COVID restrictions such as Bexar County. Thanks for clarifying that. And then she also shares that the Bureau produces weekly suspension reports that tell us which counties we can engage and form an MQA. As a result, only in some rural counties we've been able to set up MQAs. And so this is kind of, so what we've heard is that the MQAs have, and this is why I think it's been a little confusing for folks, is that we're hearing from a national level, so that's what the information that I'm sharing. But again, it's important to keep in touch with your partnership staff because they'll know best and they'll know exactly what they're able to do and what capacity they have. So thank you for pointing that out. And Mirna asked, will they ask to see a license during NARFU? The answer is no, they can't ask you for any kind of documentation. And if they need to get like a spelling of your name, you just have to spell it out for them. They cannot ask you for anything about your home, a lease, if you rent, your license, any kind of documentation around your citizenship, etc. So whatever answer you give them, that's what they're gonna ask. And if folks are hearing anything differently, those are things that we should lift up and report as well, and just to make sure that the operation is running as smoothly and as safely as possible as well. So thank you for asking that question. And I think with that, if folks have other questions, please let me know, and I'm happy to answer them. Thanks, Katie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Genesis. And thank you to everyone for sending in those comments and questions as well. We'll continue to field those throughout today's call. Now we are going to pass it over to Dr. Lila Valencia to walk us through the data.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Katie. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to share a little bit of information. I'm probably going to get a little bit more into the weeds than I have in other data updates that I've given you. So bear with me, but please do feel free to ask any questions that you may have in the chat, and I'll definitely explain some more. But we'll be looking at the typical data tools that we've been looking at during these updates: the Census Bureau's self-response map, the dashboard, the hard-to-count map from CUNY, and then our Texas Demographic Center map and dashboard. And you have links to all of those that you can access there. Next slide, please. So as many of you probably already know, the last week we ended at 57% response rate, with over 6.9 million households in Texas responding to the 2020 census. This is still below the national rate of 62.1% response. We have been consistently behind the national response rate now at about 5 percentage points. We started about 2.5 or 2.9 percentage points behind initially when data collection began. And then that gap sort of has increased, but it's stabilized. We have been closing in on that right at that 5 percentage point mark below the national average. But the counts keep coming in. We're still ranked at 40th. We're actually really close to 39th. Mississippi is at 39th with 57.1% response rate. So if we can really just push up our response rate a little bit more, we could actually make it back out of the 40s, which hasn't happened for a little while, but I think it's completely doable. And then just remember, you can see rankings for the ranking dashboard at that link right above the underneath the title 2020 self-response by state. And then of course you can share your images by going to the little share icon. Next slide, please. And so what we've been seeing is a continuation of, what we've been seeing from the beginning of the data collection for self-response. We see that the population triangle, those more populated areas of the state, more densely populated areas of the state, and the suburban areas surrounding them have been leading response rates in the state. We also have some areas in the Panhandle in West Texas that have been doing really well, including El Paso, San Angelo, Lubbock, and the Randall area. We now have 96 counties that have a 50% or above response rate. And that's really good because it really gets us closer and closer to having a good foundation for the beginning of NRFU. It really makes it possible for the Census Bureau to be able to focus entirely on those lower response rate areas. We have a couple of counties that are on the verge of meeting that threshold, including Fayette, which has been on that cusp for a while now. So I think just a few households responding to that would put it over the 50% response rate. And I really encourage, if you're working in that area, to really help to promote how that could really be helpful in terms of the follow-up that the Census Bureau has to do. And then Anderson County, and there's a handful of other counties that are in the lower 40%. And so we can definitely make sure that those get sort of some attention as well, and push us above that 50% response rate in more areas across the state. Next slide, please. Here are the rankings. Again, you can see the rankings at the national level on the top half of the panel. You see that Texas is at 40th, and then you can see how many households are responded or estimated to have responded based on that response rate. Then the bottom half looks at the counties and the cities in the state of Texas. And so we see that Fort Bend is still in the lead and with a response rate of 69.1%. Mountain City, Texas is still at 88.5%. And looking over the data, as the response rates have been coming in between Mondays and Fridays, we look to see what areas are really driving up the count. And what we're seeing is that a lot of those rural areas that have now finally received their update leave packets and are starting to be able to mail those in, and those are being processed. We're seeing those small Texas cities and small Texas counties driving up the response rate. We are also seeing some, impressive increases in mid-sized cities and counties like Odessa and Mission, Harlingen, and Eagle Pass. Maverick County this last week saw the biggest increase of all the 254 counties. They went up by nearly a full percentage point. And I know that that sounds low, but the state of Texas has been going up as a state by 0.1%. And so it's really very impressive, and they are a mid-sized county. So this means that in a week they added at least, or were able to enumerate at least about 160 households. And so we really, if you're on the meeting and you are working in Maverick County, I just want to thank you for all of your efforts, because you have been doing an excellent job, and we really, really appreciate it. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to show you a couple of updates that have been made to some of the tools that we've been using, just so that you're aware how to use them. This is the CUNY Hard to Count map that I know many of you are familiar with, but they have a new feature that's called Data Trends. And if you go to the next slide, you'll be able to see that what it shows you is a trend line across the entire data collection period for cities and counties. You can pick the state, and then you're able to see the 254 counties there by the type of contact strategy. So whether, and you can filter by contact strategy, you can filter by response type. So if you just want to see people who have been responding by internet and who received an internet choice or internet first invite, you can filter by those. Once you select a county, so for instance, here I have selected Fort Bend County, it will highlight and embolden that line on the trend chart so that you're able to see it more clearly. It'll show you the overall response rate as well as the mail and the internet rates. And so it's useful to be able to look at that. This also says that you're able to search for state or county. I haven't been able to search by county, which would then allow you to look at the cities within a county or something like that. So I'm going to keep looking into that and maybe send an inquiry into CUNY to see how I can do that. Because I found it, you know, a state as big as Texas with the 254 counties and over 3,000 cities, it's a little bit difficult to look at those statistics and those trend lines. So, but I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that this new visualization was there. On the next slide, I show you how I filtered here for update leave, and then I looked at the different counties. And you can see that Carson County was one of the counties that had one of the biggest jumps in response rate between update leave and now. And you can see that their overall rate right now is about right at about 49%. And you can see where they started or where they were before update leave was initiated in that county. So it gives you a good sort of historical perspective of how far we've come and how far your work has brought us along in these response rates. Next slide, please. And then I also just wanted to share with you, this is our response rate dashboard. We have, first of all, we've updated it so we now have data available for all of the census tracts. We have reallocated some of the old geographies into the new geographies, and so we were able to provide statistical information for the different characteristics for the new geographies as well. So you should be able to find that. But another thing that we added was in the bar chart on the left panel, we now have added the 2010 response for each geography. So for instance, the census tract has the 2010 and the current response rate, as well as the county, the state, and for the US. And so hopefully that's an additional tool that you might be interested in looking to see how close your county is or your census tract is to where they were in 2010. Next slide, please. And then just really quickly, the top 5 counties, again, Fort Bend County is in the lead, followed by Rockwall, Collin, Ellis, and Williamson. All of these counties, what they have in common is that they are suburban ring counties. These are areas of higher affluence, higher connectivity. Many of them are highly diverse areas, but they are also some more homogeneous than the rest of the state. But you can see that these are their response rates are all well over the response rate for the state of Texas. The bottom 5 counties are Edwards, Kennedy, Real, Loving, and Hudspeth. And one thing that you will probably recall from our previous data recaps during these updates is that these counties are smaller counties in more rural areas of the state with large update leave shares of their population and their households. And so you can see that their response rate ranges from 13.3% to 18.6%. And then on the next slide, I provide just the counties that are closest to meeting their 2010 milestone. We do not have any counties yet that have met that milestone in the state of Texas, but we have some that are awfully close. So if you're in Jackson or Burnett, Johnson, Goliad, or Parker, we are really close to that 2010 milestone, which really will get us, like I said, to a good foundation, a good beginning when the non-response follow-up begins in mid-August. So if you're working in any of those counties, thank you for all of your hard work, and just keep pushing a little bit more because you're almost there. Next slide, please. And this is where I'm going to get a little bit more into the weeds for our data analysis. At the Demographics Center, we've been looking at response rates from the beginning of mid-March to the latest data that we looked at for this analysis was right before the July 4th weekend. And we looked at a number of variables and characteristics that make an area hard to count, or that had characteristics that we thought might be related to response rate. And we looked to see how closely those variables, those characteristics were associated with the response rates that we were seeing. And so what you're seeing here are fractions. They are correlation coefficients. And so basically they range from 0 to 1. If they are positive, they are positively associated with response rate. So that means that as that characteristic goes up, so does the response rate, and vice versa. If the number is negative, that means that as there is more of that characteristic, the response rate is lower. And so also the closer it gets to 1, the stronger the association. I have bolded here in highlighted in bold the characteristics that we found to have the strongest correlation with response rate. At the very bottom of the table, you see percent internet. In those census tracts where there was a high percentage of internet access, we saw a very strong relationship with, or correlation with the response rates in those census tracts. Then back at the top of the table, we see negative relationships, negative associations. And so in those census tracts where there were more households that had a poverty rate of 200% of the poverty line and below, if there were more of those households, then the response rate tended to be lower. The next one is for percent poverty of less than 100%. So those that are at 100% poverty, and then all of those below, as well as percent no internet, percent update leave, and percent Hispanic. These were some of the stronger correlations that we saw with the data. So for all of those variables, as there are more Hispanics in an area, the response rate tends to be lower. And so on the next slide, I'll show you the strongest relationships we found when we ran a regression analysis looking at these. And so this is the regression line showing the census tracts and the percent internet. And you can see that as percent internet goes up, percent response rate goes up as well. And so you can see that upward line, and you can see a real clustering around that line, which shows the strength of that association. And so basically, if a census tract has high shares of internet access, then it's going to have a higher response rate. And of course, this is something good that we want to see in a census where this is the first time that we're doing a census online. But we also then have to ask the question, well, what does it look like when somebody doesn't have internet access? What do those areas perform like? Next slide, please. So this is 200% of the poverty line and below, and you can see that the association is reversed, right? So as poverty goes up, response rate goes down, and you see that downward slope for the line. You also see that the variance or this relationship explains less of the relationship between the response rate than we saw for percent internet, but it's still a very strong relationship that explains about 1/3 of that relationship. And so what we can see here is that for census tracts that have a lot of households that are at 200% poverty and below, their response rate is likely to be lower if they have higher shares of those households. Next slide. I think we skipped one. If you'll just go, okay, no, go ahead. Thank you. So A lot of times, you know, we start to look at the percent internet and the strong positive relationship, and then we look at poverty and the negative relationship, and we think, well, maybe it's because a lot of these people don't have internet. If they are living in poverty, maybe they don't have internet. But what we find is that no internet is actually a lower correlation. And so there's something more about those households that are living at right above poverty and below that is making it challenging for the people who live in these census tracts to be able to respond. And so it goes beyond connectivity. There's something more going on. And when we're looking at the news, I think we can probably get a sense of some of the additional challenges that many of these census tracts are experiencing with a higher, with a disproportionate number of people who are living in poverty, losing their jobs during this pandemic and the economic crisis that's associated with it. And so we kind of get an inclination that it goes beyond connectivity. There's something more that we need to be able to do to reach out to these households in these census tracts. Next slide, please. And then another strong association that we saw, again, negative, is update leave. And we've known this for a while, right? And so those areas that were going to be receiving their information from the Census Bureau didn't get it until, you know, way late into late May, early June. And so their response rate is a lot lower than a lot of these other areas. And we always knew that these areas were going to be hard to count. That's why, you know, they're in more rural areas. That's why we have to do this additional effort to reach out to them. And you can see that playing out in the data as well. Next slide. And then this is percent Hispanic. We looked at percent Black, we looked at percent Asian, percent foreign born, and this was the strongest association with response rate. And again, you can see that downward slope, which means that if a census tract has a higher share of Hispanics, they are also likely to have a lower response rate. And so again, this is concerning. It's not a super strong relationship. As you can see, the clustering of the dots is not as close to that line as we saw with some of the previous regression lines. And so it's not a super strong relationship, but we do know that the areas where we see higher concentrations of Hispanics are definitely going to need additional attention to get those response rates up. And I think the next slide is just a reminder to all of you to continue with your digital efforts. It's clearly going to take more, right, than to reach out to these hard to count areas. But we encourage you to keep those stakeholders aware that that these rates are still a challenge in Texas. And I know, for instance, that the county judge in Maverick County is working really hard to make sure that they meet that 2010 response rate. And so we can keep them updated about how their areas are doing. If you have a question about your particular area, we'll be sure to, you know, celebrate those that get close to those milestones and that are getting those high daily increases, as well as make you aware of some of our remaining challenges. So just, you know, follow us on our social media and continue to share that information. Thank you. This is all I have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Valencia, for sharing all of that data. You definitely took me back to my statistics classes in grad school, but lots of really awesome information. And if anyone does have any questions or clarifying comments about anything that Dr. Valencia shared out, again, please feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A box. She shared a lot of really important information to help us get out the count, so all questions are welcomed. Now we are going to switch gears and talk about Get Out the Count efforts this week. So the first thing that I'm sure hopefully many of you have heard of, and I know Genesis spoke about it at the top of this call, but this week the Census Bureau is doing a surge week in Texas. So what does that mean? It just means that the Census Bureau throughout the Dallas-Denver region, but we're going to talk specifically about Texas, is working really, really hard to get out the count this week. So they're partnering with local organizations, they're getting out in the media, they're posting lots of things on social media. And so our job is to help amplify their efforts across the state this week. So very similar to our road trip, again, this week we're trying to get everyone in Texas talking about the census. It's going from July 20th through July 26th. One thing I did want to point out that I took from the Census Bureau's website, and I have this linked in the PowerPoint presentation as well, is that the Census Bureau has put together this really quick 2-pager just about getting out the count during COVID-19 and some different ideas. I know many of you have already implemented things like census parades or doing challenges or just being visible in some of those essential locations. And of course, thank you, keep those up. But if you were looking for some additional ideas or some other things related to outreach, this is a really good resource for you. And as a reminder, the Census Bureau still has a lot of outreach materials on their website. And so if you are looking for fresh content, I highly encourage you to hop on their website and share and promote. And again, all this week, we're talking about the census. So whether that is putting things on your social media, connecting with your local partnership specialist, discussing how you can help their team promote the 2020 census. Maybe you have the ability to do some phone banking this week. Whatever that might look like, again, we really want to amplify the Census Bureau's efforts this week to get out the count. In addition to that, this weekend, we are doing another Faith Community Census Weekend of Action. I think we've done a few of these so far, but as a reminder, this is a weekend to where folks that are practicing believers are going to faith community, well, I guess virtually going to faith communities on the weekend. We're asking faith leaders to promote the 2020 census. The Census Bureau has prepared 2 really great resources to promote the census this weekend. One being the Census Action Guide, which I'll show you a little bit of, and then 2, they have this really great comprehensive newsletter of just more information about what this week is going to look like, as well as some ideas for outreach and some social media shareables as well. Looking specifically at some of those things in the toolkit, again, I just wanted to give you a quick preview. I believe these are new additions to their community action toolkit. But again, some ideas for how you can promote the census. Oops, sorry, I clicked on the link. Oops, give me 1 second. Okay, hopefully y'all can still see. Okay, sorry, I linked everything. That's why I got sent to the other page. But just some ideas for how you can promote the census, whether you're a faith leader or not. Again, these are just really great ways to get your communities involved in talking about the 2020 census. In addition, let's see if it's gonna let me advance. Nope, okay. Sorry, y'all, technical difficulties. Okay, there we go. In addition to the Census Bureau's Week of Action this week and the Faithful Week of Action or Weekend of Action coming up this weekend, I also wanted to share some things from the Texas Counts virtual road trip and what we've been up to. We loved the road trip so much that we are not gonna, it's gonna be the never-ending summer or the never-ending road trip as we continue to utilize the collateral we had throughout the course of that week. So the first thing I wanted to point out is that I know many of you utilized the toolkit during the road trip, and there was a lot of really great graphics and tweets and sample messaging on there. Do know that we have repurposed and reorganized that toolkit so you can continue sharing out those graphics, messaging, and ideas throughout the course of the census season. We know that our deadline was supposed to be at the end of this month, but we are moving into October, and so with that in mind, I highly encourage you, and I'll share the link for this toolkit in the follow-up email, but make sure to be checking in because again, we have all of the graphics and messaging we shared throughout the course of the road trip, but we're also going to be continuing to add new information. And one thing that we're really excited about adding is that there were so many great, safe, get out the count efforts that were led either virtually online or safely in person in community. communities. And we're hoping to compile all of those different types of events in one place, to where if you are planning on hosting a census caravan, or if you are wanting to partner with an essential location like a food bank in your community, what are some of the, we're going to try and list out what those best practices are carrying out those get out the count efforts. So more information on that to come very soon. In addition to that, everything that happened throughout the course of the road trip is now live on our website. So if you go to texascounts.org/virtual road trip, this is what's going to come up for you. Again, here's that toolkit for counting in every corner of Texas that you'll be able to access. And we also do a feature on every one of our regions that we focused on or that we visited throughout the road trip. So we know we started in the Gulf Coast in East Texas. And so here are just some samples of what's working in those regions. You can do a sightseeing recap of the Gulf Coast if you want to tune into the kickoff event that we hosted, as well as see other get out the count efforts and local resources. We also included all of the amazing video greetings from the area. We had a lot because we had so many wonderful partners in the Gulf Coast and in East Texas as well. And then we also have what events happened throughout the course of that week, which is really great too. But one thing I did want to point out is that we are still wanting to promote your efforts and your events. So even though the road trip is over, if you are planning on hosting an event, go ahead and send that information to info@texascounts.org so we can amplify and elevate your efforts as well on social media. One example that I wanted to pull out, big thank you to Delilah Garcia from the Census Bureau, who sent me this amazing photo from a census caravan, but has also been just sending me updates about different events that they're doing throughout their communities that they serve. So for example, this Wednesday, they are doing a census reminder caravan from 10 to 12. They're partnering with Raymondville, which is great and wonderful. They'll be getting out the count by reminding their communities to fill out the census via a caravan, but they're also doing census response sites. So you can see they're partnering with the city of South Padre Island and Vitalant. Hopefully I said that right. They're also partnering with Harlingen as well. And so again, two really great methods of getting out the count. One, of course, being that census caravan, but two, partnering with those essential locations, partnering with our cities and local orgs to make sure that we are setting up at essential location sites and we're promoting the 2020 census. We know that we've seen it work in the past to where when we're partnering with our food banks or partnering with our local blood banks who are doing donation drives, that we really can reach folks. And so I encourage you to, again, think about what safe events you can still be planning to get out the count. To reach out to your Census Bureau partnership specialist and staff in your area. They are always excited and welcoming of your ideas and areas for partnership. And so they really do want to work with you. And so, yeah, just wanted to share some really great ideas around that. We are nearing the end of our call. Looks like we might be ending a few minutes early, but I did want to share out again that we love hosting this weekly update call, but as a reminder, we meet every other Monday. And so we loved getting to connect with you today. And the next time that we will be going live will be August 3rd. And so as a reminder, we won't be meeting next week, but we'll be meeting the following Monday. So we highly encourage you to tune in, to share it out with other folks who are leading census efforts in your communities as well, if they want the latest news about the 2020 census in Texas. We also took a mini break on the Texas Counts newsletter, but do know that you will be getting that into your inboxes this week if you are signed up. Lots of really great information that we'll be sharing out there as well. And also just keep an eye and ear out, because we are in the process of putting together some other outreach strategies and ways for you to get engaged and get out the count efforts. So we're really excited to connect with you in the future, because our work is not done yet, and we are putting together some really fun ideas for folks to get engaged in this work at the state level. But with that, that, I'm going to go ahead and pause to see if we do have any questions via Zoom or our Facebook Live. And then, yeah, we'll plan to answer any remaining questions and then close up.
Hey, Katie, there's a comment from Ginger who shared that, did everyone see the census video challenge? The top winner was from Texas. Ginger, I think, Katie, you guys interviewed Keaton, didn't you?
Yes, thank you so much, Ginger, for pointing that out. One, if you haven't seen the Census Video Challenge winner, his name is Keaton. He's from Austin, Texas. One, the video is amazing. It is so good. It really hits home, I think, for folks in Texas. So I highly encourage you to check it out. And two, during our road trip on Friday, we actually had the opportunity to interview Keaton about his experience making the video and also his inspiration behind that. And I believe that video is still live on the Texas Counts Facebook page. So one, if you haven't checked out the video, I highly encourage you to check it out and share it. And then two, if you want a little bit more background information, we have a great interview with Keaton on the Facebook page.
And then another question in the chat box is also from Maria, who asks, hi, any tips or ideas you have for small towns not having a great count?
Thank you. Great question, Maria. And as you've seen, kind of as we looked through the data, and we know that we are having those low self-response rates in some areas. So the first thing I would say that I believe has been effective is one, those census caravans. And so if you are able to get together a group of people who are able to put signs or write on their windows to promote the 2020 census and go through some of those communities with low self-response, I encourage you to check that out. In addition, another thing that has worked really well in communities is giveaways or challenges. So for example, I can't exactly remember where this was, but I know in a city, the mayor had put together these really great boxes of cleaning supplies. And so if community members filled out the census and could show proof that they completed the census, then they would receive this really big box of cleaning supplies just for everything that we need during this pandemic. So there's a way to where you can partner with, whether it be the local government or local nonprofit or business or organization, to where you could think about a giveaway. Those have been really effective throughout Texas. In addition to that, thinking about where folks are actually going during this time. So if you have a food bank in your area, gas stations have been another really great point to reach people. So maybe that's partnering with those local businesses and having flyers put up. Or I know sometimes at gas stations, they have those recorded messages. Maybe it's again, partnering with that gas station to get maybe 10 seconds to promote the 2020 census. So again, just thinking about where folks are going during this time, where are those heavily trafficked areas, and thinking about how community partners can really help you elevate census messaging. I'm trying to think, I'm not sure, Lila or Genesis, if y'all have any other ideas for how to promote. Myrna says Brownsville is hosting a social media giveaway to help increase their low self-response rate. They're also hosting a Facebook Live with the mayor so that he can complete the census questionnaire live on Facebook. Again, that's great. Those giveaways are huge and key because, again, giveaways are fun, but also folks are in need of items right now. So those can be really great connection points. And then getting trusted messengers or voices in your communities to reach out to community members and connect with them is another really great way. Thanks for sharing, Myrna.
Katie, this is Lila. I think the one thing I would add is in speaking with some of the partnership specialists and partnership coordinators in the state, when they hear of the research that we're working on and that strong relationship, negative association with poverty and response, they really feel that some of the most effective sort of tactics that can be employed is what you're talking about, right? The giveaways, but things like gift cards to grocery stores. I know Univision had a cash or I think it was a Visa card or something giveaway as well. And so if you can partner with somebody to be able to provide those sorts of opportunities to win things like that, that could really go a long way in reaching some of the communities that are most at need right now during this, especially during this economic hardship time.
I would also add that, so one idea that's popped up for us is that we've had board members in school districts across the state who, given the current situation and anticipating that a lot of their students are going to need computers, they're inviting either Census Bureau staff or, community members who are promoting the census to come and talk about the census during those registration times. So that might be a good opportunity for folks as well if you reach out to your school board members or your districts to see what kind of events they have where folks are going to be in person. Given the current situation, of course, safety is really important, but just knowing that you have a lot of avenues to collaborate with your districts at this point, especially since they probably want to do this work as well, but they're probably really overwhelmed with anticipating the needs of their students.
And I think I would also just add, Katie, to Mirna's comment in Brownsville, is if the mayor could actually, I'm not sure how they're thinking about doing this, but one of the things that we've heard from community leaders here in Austin is that, we've been telling people to respond online and that they can call by phone or mail. But a lot of people kind of assume that if they're responding online, that means on a computer. And they kind of forget or don't realize that maybe we haven't done a good job of explaining this, but that they can actually use their mobile phone to do it online. And, being able to just quickly just pull up your smartphone and get online and do, respond to the census in that way was really something that, we heard from them that wasn't clear to a lot of community members. And so if the mayor was open to doing something like that on their mobile phone, I think that would be really, really helpful in sort of communicating that even if you don't have internet access at home, or if you have a smartphone that's connected to the internet wherever you may be, you can respond in that way too.
Thank you, Lila. That's a really great point. And yes, you can definitely use your mobile device to fill out the census questionnaire. And maybe that's an idea for some graphics that we can share out to promote the 2020 census. We did get one more question. And Genesis, I think I'm going to pass this over to you because I think you can answer it in 20 or 30 seconds or less. But Mirna wants to know, has anyone gotten a question on the race question? She was just wondering how, when we do have large populations of Hispanics or Latinos, what's the best way to tell them to respond to that race question?
Yeah, this is a good question. And it's actually a question that I get all the time, given that a lot of folks who haven't responded are Latino. There's no short answer, but I guess if we were to give one, it's that there is no wrong answer. So folks get really, because it's race and ethnicity, they look at ethnicity. Folks, who are Latino will say, well, I've already filled out the first part of this question. Why do I have to fill out the race part of this question? So Latinos can be of any race. And one thing to remind them is if they don't see themselves represented in the second part of the question, that there is some other race and that they can include that as well. We do want to encourage folks to fill it out as completely as possible, given that if we don't fill it out in its entirety, it does increase the chance that a Census Bureau employee will follow up in some capacity. And then we also do know that there's some type of imputation. So if you don't include anything and you do answer the first half, you don't answer the second, then the Bureau will just choose white for you. And for a lot of folks, that may not be the way that they identify themselves. So if this is we have a lot of resources around this, and I'll share them with Katie, who can share them out in addition to the slides that we've covered today, so that folks can see kind of and read through and listen to some of the resources that we've already created. Because I think if this is a consistent question that you're getting, then we're happy to send those resources along.
Thank you, Genesis. I don't believe we have any more questions on our Zoom or on the Facebook Live feed, but all of our emails are on this slide. So if you ever do need to reach out to us, we always love it when y'all connect in email. So please feel free to email us anytime. We'll make sure that the slides, recordings, anything we talked about today, the links for that we'll share out after this webinar later this week. And again, we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. We hope everyone is safe and well during this time. And yeah, we look forward to connecting again in 2 weeks. Thanks, everybody.